The night was thick with silence, broken only by the distant crackle of torches along the high walls of Troy. The city had endured nearly 10 years of war. For a decade, the Trojans had defended their gates against the relentless Greeks. Fathers had become warriors, sons had perished on the fields outside the walls, and mothers had grown accustomed to weeping. Yet still, Troy stood its walls unbroken, its people resolute. But beyond those walls, the Greek camp lay in ruins. Smoke curled from the remnants of tents. Ships that had once filled the shoreline were gone. To the Trojans who peered across the plain at dawn, it seemed as though their enemies had vanished overnight. And in the center of that desolate plain, bathed in golden morning light, stood something no one could explain, a colossal wooden horse. It towered higher than the city gates, its flanks built from freshly cut timbers, its form carefully carved and shaped to resemble the animal sacred to the goddess Athena. Its polished surface gleamed, and its sheer size commanded awe and suspicion. The people of Troy crowded to the walls. "What is it?" whispered a boy, his wide eyes fixed on the strange beast. "A gift," murmured another, remembering the stories of Greek offerings to their gods. But not everyone was convinced. Laocoon, the Trojan priest of Poseidon, hurried forward, his voice ringing across the courtyard. "Fools, do not trust this trickery. Do you think the Greeks, after 10 years of war, would simply abandon their siege? Do you think they would leave us such a monument out of kindness?" He raised his hands toward the horse. "I fear the Greeks, even when they bear gifts." The crowd shifted uneasily. Laocoon's warning struck chords of doubt, but curiosity tugged at their minds. The war had drained them hope of peace. Even false peace was tempting. As the people argued, a group of soldiers dragged a ragged man from the fields. His clothes were torn, his face smeared with dirt, his eyes filled with terror. He fell to his knees before King Priam. "I am Sinon," he cried, "a Greek who has been abandoned by my people. They wished to sacrifice me to the gods for safe passage home, but I escaped. I beg for your mercy." The Trojans leaned in closer, intrigued. Priam's voice was calm, but sharp. "Why have your people left this horse? Speak, and tell no lies." Sinon lowered his head. "The Greeks built it as an offering to Athena. The goddess demanded a gift to atone for stealing her statue from Troy years ago. The horse is sacred to her. They made it so large that you cannot bring it inside your walls, for they feared you might steal her favor if you did." His words rippled through the crowd like wildfire, an offering to Athena, a holy relic. A symbol of Greek defeat. Some cheered, others doubted. But the seed of belief had been planted. Laocoon, furious, raised his spear and hurled it at the beast. The weapon struck the horse's belly with a hollow thud. The sound echoed, deep and strange, as if the wooden shell were hollow inside. As silence followed, the Trojans shifted uneasily again, their doubts returning. But before the tension could break, a cry rose from the shore. The sea, all eyes turned. From the waves surged to monstrous serpents, their coils glistening, their eyes burning with malice. They slithered across the sand, their massive bodies crushing the earth, and hurled themselves toward Laocoon. The priest shouted, his sons beside him, but the creatures wrapped around them with impossible strength. The people screamed as Laocoon and his children were crushed, dragged into the surf, and swallowed by the waves. Terror gripped Troy. To many, it seemed clear, the gods themselves had punished Laocoon for doubting the gift. The horse was sacred, the horse must be brought inside. By evening, ropes were tied, and men strained their muscles to drag the giant horse toward the gates. It scraped across the earth, inch by inch, its vast frame dwarfing those who pulled it. Women sang hymns to Athena, torches lit the streets, and the people rejoiced, believing the war was over. At last, with great effort, the horse was pulled inside Troy. Its towering form stood in the square, casting long shadows across the city as the sun dipped below the horizon. That night, Troy celebrated, wine flowed, music filled the air. Children danced in the streets, and soldiers laid down their swords for the first time in years. Fires blazed, feasts were shared, and joy returned to a city long consumed by sorrow. But as the revelry spread, few noticed that the horse stood eerily silent. Inside its hollow belly, packed into the wooden ribs, Greek warriors crouched in darkness. Their leader, Odysseus, kept his hand on his sword. Around him were the finest warriors of Greece: Menelaus, Diomedes, Neoptolemus, and others all waiting, all listening to the muffled sounds of laughter outside. The hours dragged, the air inside grew heavy. Sweat dripped down faces, breaths were shallow, weapons pressed against knees. They waited and waited until, at last, silence fell over Troy. The fires dwindled. The music faded, the streets emptied, and then a signal. A torch lit from within the horse's belly. Carefully, the trapdoor opened, and one by one, the warriors slipped down ropes into the sleeping city. Odysseus touched the earth, his face grim. Now, he whispered. Silently, they spread through the streets, blades drawn. To the gates they crept, where other Greeks who had sailed back under cover of night waited in their ships, just beyond the shore. The gates groaned open, the army poured in like a flood. The city awoke to screams, flames roared through Troy, warriors stormed houses, cutting down men in their beds. Mothers clutched children, fleeing into the streets, only to be struck down. The palace was overrun, its halls echoing with the clash of swords and the cries of the dying. King Priam, old and weary, fell at the altar of Zeus, cut down without mercy. Cassandra, his daughter, shrieked prophecies no one heeded, dragged away into slavery. And through the chaos strode Neoptolemus, son of Achilles, his eyes blazing with fury. He sought Andromache, the widow of Hector, and her young son. Rage consumed him, and in his madness, he hurled the boy from the walls, ending the line of Troy's greatest hero. The fire spread higher, devouring temples, homes, and memories. The proud city that had withstood a decade of war crumbled in a single night. At dawn, smoke blackened the sky, the once mighty walls of Troy smoldered, broken and scarred. Survivors were bound in chains, their futures uncertain. The Greeks gathered their spoils, their victory sealed not by strength alone, but by cunning. And in the ruins, the wooden horse still stood charred, silent, its belly empty. A monument not to divine favor, but to deception, the Trojan horse became legend. A tale of hubris, of trust misplaced, of gods invoked and men destroyed. It was a reminder that the greatest danger may not always come from the swords of enemies, but from the gifts they offer with open hands. For in that single night, the pride of Troy, the shining jewel of the East, was reduced to ash. And from its ashes would rise stories, myths, and warnings told for thousands of years.